What we're going to do is try to go on now to the subject of communication, which is the third topic that you'll deal with, and it's on page 60 in your manual. And this section of this particular topic in the manual has the most information. So we're going to go through the information, and what some of our couples have done in order to facilitate their presentation of this, they've made like a little outline that they can work from, or the key points that they want to make sure, God bless you, that they get across. So whatever is going to help you to do the communication section, you'll have to kind of work with it yourself and see. This is, like I told Father, this is the section that is going to need a good bit of rewriting because of social media, the texting, the technology has influenced the way especially our young people communicate or don't communicate. So we know that that's going to have to be worked on, and you can certainly, if you're dealing with that yourself, if you know a lot about it and how it affects your marriage, you know that's got to come into your own presentation of that. So if we look at page 60, the goal of this session is to help the engaged couple realize the primary importance of communication and conflict resolution skills to the health of the marriage relationship. The depth of communication sets the pulse for the marriage. The ability to express clearly one's needs and feelings to the other, and the ability to resolve inevitable conflicts in a constructive manner are vital skills for a happy marriage that can be developed with practice. I guess the number one reason listed for marital breakups is poor communication and conflict resolution. So we know that this is like a really critical area that we try to spend a lot of time with. The good news is that communication is a skill that you can get better at, that you can learn certain things and get better at doing. So we feel hopeful with our engaged couples in this. The homework exercises, we've kind of showed you again how to process those. And what we do, we showed you the 10-statement autobiography. The one that was, the second one that we told you about, the what will it be like, which is the one that was separated into sections, expectations you have about each of the different parts of marriage. In order to process that homework, that's on page 59C, what we basically do is take it by section, and we'd say, okay, in sharing my space, how was your discussion about that with each other? What do you think that you might have to adjust to in sharing your space, your time alone, and that kind of stuff? Sharing my thoughts and feelings, how was that? Sharing my money. And we'll ask them a couple of the questions, like, how much do you expect to be able to spend without consulting your spouse once you're married? And we've had everything from $10 to $3,000, you know? I mean, it's been unbelievable. But it's good for them to talk about that and get it out in the open. And
the idea that comes up often in money that surprisingly many of the couples haven't dealt with is like, are we going to have separate bank accounts or one bank account? You know, we always say the issue when dealing with finances isn't about, you know, what app you're using or what software package you're using. It's what your attitudes about money. What's your attitudes about credit? Is it my money and your money? No, it's all our money. But you know, how do you manage it? Who's going to be responsible for monitoring the money? Who's going to be responsible for paying bills? So we'll both do that together. No, you know, no. You don't sit down and pay bills together, you know. One of you may pay bills and then let the other look, you know, but you don't do it together. So who's going to do it? So it's good the discussion to have, make sure they have it.
Discussing finances is an issue that's often fraught with a lot of feelings, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of pride. You know, it's a difficult area, so we know that that's got a lot of stuff on it. So what we're going to do now is start on page 61. Again, I'm going to let Lloyd do the primary part of the teaching and just add to it. But again, in the interest of time, so we can get through the information, we're going to go through the manual and kind of show you how we do the communication presentation.
Yeah. And keep in mind, like Jan said earlier, this is the meatiest section probably in the manual in terms of a lot of content. And you probably have more in here than you could possibly cover. It's just a matter just so that you understand what you're talking about, just be able to touch on some of these points. And because there's so much content here, this is a time that you really have to be careful in going over the homeworks, that you really try to keep it to under an hour, because you need about an hour to do this material. And the homeworks are rich when you're dealing with, the 10-statement autobiography, and you're dealing with some of those homeworks. There's going to be a lot of good stuff there that you really want to probe, and you just have to keep an eye on your time on this one. So I usually start it off, with identifying the 3 sections of the homework, of the presentation at the top of page 61. And what I generally would say here, is that we're going to cover this into 3 categories. We're going to talk about what we call the hierarchy of communication, the different depths at which we communicate. We're going to talk about obstacles of communication, and then we're going to talk about some of the what do you do when you have conflict? How do you deal with healthy conflict? Communication really sets the pulse of the marriage. And when a couple is communicating deeply and experiencing what we call that level of emotional intimacy, because they're able to communicate deeply and able to resolve conflict timely, everything else in the marriage seems to work well. And physical intimacy becomes a natural celebration of the emotional intimacy they're experiencing. So this is the most important skill that we need to work on. And notice I say skill and not gift. Some people are better at this than others, but we can all get better at it with a little bit of skill. So let's start with the hierarchy of communication, and I'll just touch on this one briefly. But what we try to do is set up something like 5 characteristics of communication, or styles of communication, that progressively get deeper. So we describe, for example, the cliche or small talk. I kind of call it elevator talk. You get on an elevator, you can say something about the weather to anybody. You don't reveal much of yourself. Sharing of facts. What I often do here is I'll try to, by this point, it's our 3rd meeting with them. You have an idea of the personality of the couple, so I'll try to identify the person of the couple who maybe is a little more bottled up and not so willing to share, and I'll use them as an example. And so let's assume it's the groom. And so to share the facts, I'll say, okay, well, facts is when you let each other in on, what's going on in your life, what happened today. So, we roll forward and y'all are having dinner, and bride, you ask groom, well, Charlie, how was your day today? And he answers you that he was really busy on a project and he had lunch with Joe. So it gives you a little snapshot, not very much depth there, but a little snapshot of your activity, facts. We go to the deeper level when we begin to share opinions, because our opinions are shaped by our values, and we want people to like us. So often you find when someone asks you your opinion, don't you tend to hesitate a little bit and say, where do I think this person is, before I really blurt it out there. Let me see what I think they are, particularly if you're dealing with issues of politics or faith, or some form of Texas football in Texas, I imagine. You got to be a little casual. Be careful. What team are we rooting for here? But we go deeper if we begin to share feelings. So I'll go back to that example that I used earlier about the guy and, how was your day today? So Charlie, how was your day today? And instead of telling you that he was busy on a project and he ate lunch with Joe, he tells you that he had an encounter with the supervisor, and he realized that he totally missed the boat on the project he was supposed to work on. And he feels so much like a failure. I can't believe I screwed this up. I tried so hard, and I really wonder, if I'm really cut out for this work. I said, wow. Now that's what bride wants to hear. That's where Charlie is right down in his gut. Huh? That's feeling. So very different tone from facts. And so what you see happening as we go down this hierarchy is you're getting deeper and deeper into someone really opening themselves up. So at the same time, there are fewer and fewer people that you're going to open up like this. But you hopefully, with your spouse, you can get to this level of depth. And then the last, even deeper than feelings, is that sharing of needs. When you're able to say to your spouse, I need you to turn off the TV and listen to me right now. Something's really bugging me. Or, I just need you to hold me. When you share your needs with another person, boy, you really are out there. You are totally vulnerable. and because you're giving someone the power to shut you down. Now, when you think about it, the reason this is so important is that nearly every argument you've ever had with each other, or ever will have, happens because one of you in the exchange feels like your feelings aren't being understood by the other, or your needs aren't being met. Now, whether you verbalize those needs or not, it's a different issue. You know, a lot of times we don't verbalize our needs. We think our spouse should understand our needs. No. You got to articulate your needs. You got to speak your needs. But it's usually this disconnect on feelings and needs causes most of the conflict. So if we can do a better job of communicating on a regular basis at this deeper level of feelings and needs, we're going to have a lot less conflict in our marriages. That being said, most people go through life, including most married couples, communicating on the basis of facts and opinions. They don't want to often, or they don't go down as regularly as they should to the level of feelings and needs. So that's the gist of the first part. We have a little bit here about communicating feelings, ways to communicate feelings, and importance of communicating feelings that you probably won't cover all of, but you may want to touch on. So topic number 63 is an example. You know, people use the word feel an awful lot, but usually the rule of thumb is if we say, I feel that, you're about to express an opinion. You're not expressing a feeling. A feeling has color to it. Huh? It's an adjective. So here's an example here at the top of the page. So expressing a thought. I feel that your mother is more important to you than me. No, that's an opinion. A feeling is I feel unappreciated because you seem to care for your mother more than me. That's a feeling. So we have to kind of push ourselves often to do a better job on our feelings and recognize that in our culture typically, and I hate to be stereotypical, but I think it usually is true, our men are usually not encouraged to share their feelings as much as women are growing up. And so many times it's going to take a while for brides to help their grooms understand how to describe these feelings, how to look inside, how to say what's going on. It's sort of like use the analogy, it's sort of like color blindness, you know. If you see everything vividly and your spouse is colorblind, it's going to take a while for them to kind of grow to be able to articulate the feelings. And this is a healthy thing for them to do so that you can really deepen your sense of understanding each other, of real intimacy. So there was some, like I said, on those 2 pages, some information on communicating feelings and needs that you can touch on as necessary. So now we want to shift over to the obstacles for communication, page 65. So this is the second part. And so we're asking ourselves, you know, despite our best efforts to communicate, despite the love we have for one another, sometimes, you know, we just seem to miss it. You know, we just don't connect. And what are some of the reasons that get in the way? So the first one here we have on page 65 is that subject matter. And this was something I mentioned last time, that there were these 6 or so subject matter issues that can be a problem. And Jan and I were talking earlier and said, you know, we probably need to add a 7th one here, and that is hobbies or entertainment, you know, nowadays, in the sense that, you know, we encounter more and more people, more and more couples who are struggling over, just what Father mentioned about the, you know, whether it's Facebook or video games, or maybe it's hunting or fishing. It's some sort of entertainment that, you know, we live in an age now where people's time is stretched to the max. And when one of the parties feels like this is their entertainment time, it really takes away from the other. Not to say you can't have entertainment, but sometimes that entertainment gets out of whack, and so that can be an issue that often is a very tender area. We see particularly this time of year a lot of wives very irritable about hunting and fishing or football, you know, whatever it is.
So as we look at these obstacles, let's look at letter B, which is personality differences. And again, what we're trying to underscore here is that there are certain challenges to our ability to communicate well with each other. Our being different personalities. Often we find that extroverts, people who process exteriorly from themselves, often marry introverts. An introverted person has to think about something, he thinks about it interiorly, he sorts through how he certain things that he thinks, insights he has, feelings he might have toward a particular subject. And then when he speaks it out, that's what he thinks. You can ask an introvert 20 minutes later and he's going to say it all over again, pretty much like he just said it. An extrovert doesn't know what they think and feel until they start talking. And they talk about it, and then they have to refine it, and they might have to talk about it 2 or 3 times before they arrive at, yeah, that's what they really think or feel. So, extroverts tend to marry introverts. And introverts find out, as Lloyd has told so many of the young people we talk to, that he didn't realize marriage was going to involve so much listening. Because if you're married to an extrovert, you have to listen. You have to help listen to them 2 or 3 times, process the same thing before you understand what they're really, wanting to say or feel.
So don't take offense on the first iteration. It's going to change.
Thinkers tend to marry feelers. People who are good with details tend to marry people who are broad vision people. So all of those personality differences, there's not a right or wrong to them. We're just attracted to another person that usually fills in the gaps for ourselves, that has aspects of life that we don't. And while that's all great, and before marriage, it's like, oh, he's so different from me, becomes, he's so different from me after marriage, because he looks at things so differently than, and so those personality differences can often grate against each other.
Yeah, and I think, like Jan mentioned, the reason why that works, it's not, I don't think it's really opposites attract. I think it is, we're all looking for a sense of fullness. And so it's what we call in our faith complementarity. We complement each other. You're strong in an area that I'm weak. And we all go around through life looking to find someone so that literally, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, because we complement each other so well. But those differences can also grate on each other until you learn to help them play in harmony. It's sort of like a musical instrument. You can pick up a musical instrument and hit 2 notes that sound like total noise, or you can play 2 notes that's a perfect fifth, and it just sounds beautiful together. So the challenge is to take our differences and to try to make them harmonize so that we're singing that beautiful chord together and not create dissonance. But those differences can also lead to conflict.
And again, I would say to you that the #1 enemy of marriage is selfishness. And the selfishness is often expressed in, this is the way it should be done. I want it done my way, or the way I look at things is correct, or my agenda, or my outlook. And that when we get so focused in on our own stuff, our own way of doing things, our own agenda, that we selfishly guard that against the other person, it causes conflict. Down at the bottom of page 65, we found this very insightful several years ago, that only 7% of the message we communicate to another person is through the words we speak. 38% of the message that another person gets is through our tone of voice. And then the rest of it is our nonverbals, our body language, our posture, our facial expressions. So that was very eye-opening to us, because we spent a lot of time trying to make sure we say things properly. And really, it's not so much the words, it's the way we present it, the way we look at the other person or don't look, the body language we carry, that's so important in communicating a certain message. And I think that's the reason that's important is, and what we've learned, a lot of times, in order to avoid or short-circuit a conflict, if you check out with the other person, like you're hearing what they're saying in a certain way, either through the way you're reading their body language or their tone of voice, and they might not be intending the meaning you're getting at all. And so often, if you'll check it out, say, let me just check this out with you. I heard you say this, but what I interpreted, or what I really thought I was hearing you say was, and give them a chance to either say yes or no. You'll avoid a conflict a lot of times if you just try to validate what you're hearing and understand it. Letter C is, I know, a surprise to everybody, but that there are fundamental differences between men and women in the way they communicate. Men tend to love to share facts. Women tend to love to share feelings. This was brought home to me so well. I was on an airplane going to speak somewhere, and I got on in New Orleans, and there were two men that got on in front of me, all decked out in purple and gold. Okay? So I knew LSU was uppermost in their mind. And from the time we left till the time we landed, they replayed together every game of that season, every play, every down, every penalty. For 2 hours, these two men, I could not believe they remembered every single fact of LSU football games. And I told Lloyd, I was so tempted when I passed them in the airport to say, guys, listen, I was just wondering, do you all know what your wife's favorite flower is? Do you have any idea what your wife was doing for football season? Because it was just amazing to me that they were so full of those facts. It was just an amazing kind of thing. Men simply connect by doing things together. That's why men like to go hunting and fishing and football games. Women generally like to connect by talking. Yeah, they want to go shopping with their friend, but why? So that they can have lunch and talk about what's going on, how are your kids doing, and what's going on in our marriage, and how do you like this color of my hair, or whatever. We're always trying to share ourselves with each other. This next one, men tend to think of one thing at a time. If you've never read the book, Men Are Like Waffles and Women Are Like Spaghetti, it's a great, fun read. Basically, the premise is men, just like a waffle has little boxes, men tend to live in little boxes. When a man's at work, that's pretty much what he's thinking about. Thinking about work. When he's eating a steak dinner, that's pretty much what he's got his mind on, his steak dinner. When he's making love to his wife, that's pretty much all he's thinking about. And then he can even go in a box where there's nothing there, because he's not thinking about anything. He just is in a box marked nothing. Whereas for a woman, her life is much more interconnected, that she can be, doing the laundry, listening to the kids' homework, talking to her best friend on the phone, and cooking dinner all at the same time. It's all just connected to her. We know physiologically now that men have more connectors back to front in their brain, and women have them more side to side, so that they are better multitaskers usually than men. Not hard and fast rule, but usually. Men, because they are more connected back to front, have a greater capacity to focus and tend to be more analytical. Again, that's not 100% every man, every woman, but it's generally, how men and women are. Women tend to think of intimacy as talking and touching, being close, where men tend to think of intimacy as the sexual embrace in very physical terms. So we know that those very differences cause us to come at the whole subject of communication differently. Whereas a woman is going to want to color the whole thing and talk about, a lot of different things, and the stories will be interconnected. A man's going to, if you ask a man a question, if I ask Lloyd a question, he deals with that question. If he asks me a question, 10 minutes later, he's wondering if I'm going to answer the question. Because I have to tell him the whole story around the answer I'm about to give. I have to put a context around everything. Okay. Now the next one, how many of you have read the book, 5 Love Languages? Anybody? One? Have you ever taken the test? Okay. You both have?
I've taken it several times.
Yeah.
Okay.
For children, after children.
Okay, I tell you what, close your book for a second. We're going to give you the test to take again. Just close your manual for a second and try to put out of your mind, the two of you all, since you already know it, but just put out of your mind what you know about it. We're just going to give you a little quick test. The yellow folder's right in front.
Okay. All right, let's see.
Is there a passing grade?
The passing grade is insight into your spouse. That's it. Okay. So make sure you get one. Okay, so what this is, these are statements about the way your spouse shows love for you. And they are all good. You like them all. They're all good. And but instinctively in your gut, there's going to be some forms of showing expression that you prefer a little more than the other. And so what this asks you to do is that each pair kind of stands on its own. So as you read the two statements in this first pair, ask yourself in your gut, which of these two appeals to me a little bit more than the other? And whichever one appeals to you a little bit more, go to the right and circle the X that lines up with that statement. Then you go to number 2. That's a fresh set of statements. So each couplet, so to speak, is on its own, stands on its own. When you get to the bottom of the second page, there are 30 pairs. It'll ask you to go back and tally up how many times did I circle the X that's in column A? How many times did I circle the X in column B? And it should all add up to 30. So this works best if you don't spend a lot of time analyzing. If you just sort of go with your gut, oh yeah, they're both good, but that's a little better. I like that a little better. See how that works.
Do it fast, you have about 5 minutes.
Just about 5 minutes,
Fast,
all it takes.
'cause you don't want to think too much about it. You should be tallying up by now. So. Go quickly, tally up.
Okay, if you've done, share your results with your spouse. Just sort of see how you differ on your totals. And we'll talk about what this is saying to us. The premise of this, what we like to focus on here are the top two numbers. So hopefully you have a number in here probably that's 8 or higher, and maybe you have 2 in that category, but you look for the top 2 numbers. So what is this all about? The person who developed this tool or theory is a guy named Dr. Gary Chapman, who is both a psychologist and he's a minister, and he found that in the course of his counseling with couples, particularly couples who were coming to him for marital difficulty, he found that often, that most of the time, it wasn't that the couple didn't love each other or weren't committed to each other, they just had very different ways of showing love to one another. And he identified 5 different styles of showing love. And he refers to them as love languages. It's sort of, and we all have a little bit of each of these styles in us, but we tend to have our preferences. We tend to have one style that we tend to show more than others, and usually the rule of thumb is the style that we show of love most commonly is the one we want to receive back. Huh? We want to get it back. So I'm going to pass out a little key here, and we'll talk through these briefly. I'll give you one per couple. And so he identified 5 styles, and these are in A through E order. So if you are in, if your highest score was in column A, for example, then you're primarily a words of affirmation person. Words of affirmation means that you really like it when your spouse compliments you, says nice things about you, tells you how nice you look, or how much they appreciate how hard you're working, or what you did for them. Those messages of appreciation, validate you, make you feel good. When you look on this little chart we gave you, if you go off to the far right, you see this column caution. This is very helpful because it says these are the behaviors that are just the worst if you're a words of affirmation person. And what is that? So criticism. If you're looking for affirmation from your spouse and you get criticism, you're going to be, hypersensitive to criticism. So you have to be sensitive about that. B is quality time. If you're high on quality time, it means that you really love when you and your spouse can just have some one-on-one time together, whether it's taking a walk in the neighborhood or going to a coffee shop or maybe watching a movie together. But just the idea that someone wants to spend their time with me makes me feel special. And this isn't going to a party together or going to a football game together. This is one-on-one time together. And again, let's go to the far right. If you're a quality of time person and you get yourself in a situation where you're separated a lot because of work or travel or otherwise, family, you're going to feel that tension. You're going to feel that distance if you're not getting your love tank sort of met through quality time. C is gift giving. Gift giving is those very creative gifts that we all know people who are very good at thinking about creative gifts. Those are usually the people who want to receive back creative gifts. If this is not very high for you, it doesn't mean that you can blow off gift giving. It just means that these other forms of love are much more pertinent to your beloved. D is acts of service. Acts of service are is helping one another in the practical things of life. The things, honey, I saw your car was empty. I went and filled up your gas tank for you. Or I took your favorite, shirt to the cleaner today, your suit to the cleaner. I know you've been wanting me to paint that bedroom, and I bought the paint today. I'm going to do it this weekend. It's acts of services. Oh, yes. It's really helping me out. You find some young moms who may not have been acts of service before. Once they have children, become acts of service people. They really appreciate the help around the house with the kids. And E is physical touch. Physical touch isn't necessarily the sexual embrace. It's just the spontaneous hand-holding, a little hug, a little squeeze of the shoulders. It's that physical connection you have with one another that makes you feel wanted, makes you feel desired. And obviously, again, physical absence, physical abuse would be a non-starter, but physical absence can be difficult if you're a physical touch person because nobody's there to touch you, to feel that touch. So, like we said, what you tend to do is you tend to show love in the way you want to receive love, but that doesn't work if your spouse has a love language that's different. So the challenge is you need to push yourself to speak love in the language of your spouse. So, we go back to the old biblical principle that's actually in the Sermon on the Mount. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's our normal rule of thumb for this, but it doesn't work with love languages. For love languages, it's speak to your spouse in a love that they can understand because it's their particular language.
And then at the bottom of that page, Dr. Chapman says, every week or so, check in with your spouse with that little question. On a scale of 1 to 10, what's the status of your love tank? Sort of like looking at your gas gauge to see if you have gas in your car. To see, are we speaking each other's love language? Are we making deposits in the emotional bank account so that in times of stress or sickness or over busyness activity, we have enough in the emotional bank account to make withdrawals and not be depleted in our relationship.
So was anybody the same love language that you go through? Anybody have the same ones?
We had one that was the same.
One the same? So usually, like I said, we usually focus on the top two. We call the primary and secondary, and those usually are the ones that drive the train. So we could tell you a number of stories, but we won't in the interest of time here. But this is proof.
But it's fun to work with. It really is, and it's, the book itself is a great.
Can be a real eye-opener for some couples. Yeah.
All right, let's just kind of go through the rest of the material in the manual. I'm just going to highlight some things, and then you can read the rest of it. On page 67, on the lack of time and other distractions, that second paragraph is something I'd like to just highlight. From the very first year of our marriage, Lloyd and I committed to at least a period of 20 to 30 minutes a day, what we call prime time communication. That's time that we spend just with each other without distraction, not when our heads are hitting the pillow and we're too exhausted. But we try every day to have a period of time where we connect with each other emotionally and just are sitting together in the quiet, having some prime time communication. And I would often ask him at the end of a busy day, and we'd gotten the kids kind of situated upstairs, and we'd sit on the sofa for our prime time communication. And I'd start off with something like, well, what was your deepest feeling today? Which for a CPA is like asking him to speak Greek, But I have to say, over the course of our years of marriage, but that's how Lloyd has gotten to be as good as he is about sharing feelings now and sharing his story. I was telling a priest friend of ours yesterday in Lafayette, I had lunch with him, and I was saying to him, you know, we were married 11 years before we made our marriage encounter weekend, and we were doing marriage prep and everything. But that was the first time, 11 years into our marriage, that Lloyd really started talking to me about his father and his father's suicide and stuff. Like really starting to delve into his feelings and his beliefs and how that situation impacted him. 11 years. I mean, it took a long time to, and it was, I think, as we've talked about it, the work of my trying to draw out from him his feelings and teaching him to get the language to speak out his feelings and making it a comfortable and safe place to do that. So that primetime communication is just something we just don't let go of. And engaged couples say, oh, sure, we can talk to each other 30 minutes a day. Married couples go like, 30 minutes a day? Where are we going to get 30 minutes a day to talk to each other, you know? But really, I think that's where we want to, again, beef up the manual and the work we do with couples is that, you know, texting each other is not a solid form of communication. It gets little facts across, it you know, tells you when to meet each other. But if that's all you're doing, you're not going to get tone of voice, body language, all those nuances of sharing who you are. And so we really need to watch that technology. So.
Yeah, and you know, we're such the extreme, because we don't do any social media at all.
We don't either.
And so when you're talking to these younger couples, I mean, that may be a solid time that their wall goes up, because they're like, these people don't even know what they're talking about. If you say, I don't Facebook, Instagram, I don't do any of that, then they're going to say, well, you have no idea what you're talking about if you're telling us not to do it. You see what I'm trying to say? So,
yeah, we're not saying don't do it. We're just saying you got to keep it in balance, and you can't, in the one-on-one intimate relationship of a marriage, you can't rely on that to do the trick. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's got to be kept in balance like anything else. If somebody wants to check Facebook a half hour a day, that's fine. Go for it. I'm not doing it, but they can do that.
But the thing is, you have, I think the thing that we tell our couples, because we don't do it either, we don't do any of those things you're talking about, but the thing that we always say is, and they already know if it's a problem, trust me.
Oh,
they
yeah.
already know if they're getting aggravated with each other because of the phone, the technology, the Facebook, whatever it is. But, you know, we always say, you have to put in the disciplines first for your marriage. Like, are you having your primetime communication, just one-on-one communication time? Are you praying together as a couple? And are you making time for each other to just have fun together, just the two of you? If you're not, then you don't have any right to be on all this other social thing. You've got to put each other first. The marriage has to come first, and then you choose the other things. One of the analogies, I'm just saying this, Lloyd developed this, and I think it's such a good story. But you know, everybody has their opinion about Nick Saban as a football coach, okay? But one of the things that we like about using him as an example is that Nick Saban coaches out to the players are coached to a standard of performance. They're not coached to each individual team they're playing, like how are we going to beat A&M or how are we going to beat Alabama? They're coached to LSU. They're coached to a standard. And so when a player comes off the field, Alabama could be winning by 20 or 30 points. But if Nick Saban felt like he wasn't doing his job on the field, he's going to chew that player out. Why? Because he's coaching him to a standard of performance. Now, what does that have to do with marriage? See, we're not comparing our marriage to everybody else in the parish or everybody else in the city. Well, we're doing really good. Look, we're going to we're going to compare ourselves to the standard that God has set for us. What is His intention for our married lives? And that's that threefold. Are we experiencing deep unity in our marriage? If we are, it's because we're praying together. We're talking deeply together. We're sharing life together, some form of ministry, something outreach. We're on the same page. Are we helping each other grow in holiness? Are we loving each other freely, totally, faithfully, fruitfully? Because if we're not, then we've got a work to do on there that has nothing to do with Facebook and everything else. we've got to go to the standard. And so we tell the couples that, that any analogies that you can use like that, but we're not trying to get you to have a marriage pretty much a little bit better than most of the people in the world. No. We're looking to have a marriage like God wants us to have a marriage, a gold medal marriage, an Olympics gold medal marriage.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so I would just say, there's an exercise at the end of this section that we often give, and they have 2 questions in there. One of them says, I think I spend too much time doing, and I think my future spouse spends too much time doing. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to hear those questions. They come back. It's usually one, if it's the exercise we give, we always ask their answers. I would say 5-10 years ago, it would, you'd hear like watching TV or whatever. Now you hear
Facebook.
Too much time on Facebook, or too much time on playing with his phone.
Games on the phone.
You hear that all the time, much more so than television. You hear it about playing with phones or Facebook, social media. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it has a value, but it can, like many things, it can be overblown. But the key is, a priest friend of ours was telling us that a guy came to see him and made an appointment, and they came to him and he said, Father, he says, I just need to talk to you about my wife and I are really having some serious trouble. And he said, well, tell me about it. What's going on? He says, well, the last 3 weeks, our life has just been so crazy together. The only way we've communicated with each other is through text messaging. And the priest says, and you wonder why you're having trouble in your marriage? I mean, to sit and text each other all day, and that's the only time, it's like ships in the night going through text messaging. That's not the way to build an intimate relationship, for sure. Not to say that you can't use text messaging, but if there's no substitute for the one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball, tell me what's going on in your life. How are you feeling today?
All right, let's go now to the third bucket, which is conflict resolution. And I want to just call your attention to something on page 68, because out of this section, this is probably one of the deepest insights that we had that helped our marriage. We were at one of our yearly going to get beefed up on our marriage, and the speaker told us this particular aspect, and it helped us tremendously, and we're going to tell you why. Okay, so it's that bottom paragraph. While any of the obstacles to communication can set the stage for a conflict, most conflicts are caused by spouses feeling that their primary emotional needs are not being met. The primary emotional need for a woman is security, not necessarily financial security, but it's a sense of security that stems from knowing she's truly first in her husband's thoughts, his priorities, and his affections. The primary emotional need for a man is a sense of adequacy, a feeling that he's adequate to the task of being a good husband, father, provider, lover, or whatever other role is important to him. Now, when a woman, because she's got greater relational antenna, designed by God like that, when a wife starts feeling that she's no longer first in her husband's life, then she starts to feel insecure. And because and I'll just use myself as an example, because I didn't know what was happening, I just knew that that Lloyd's, from December to April 15th, I didn't feel first in his life. And even though with my head, I knew it's busy season, long about February, I couldn't take feeling like his attention was away from me. His thoughts, I wasn't first. I felt like I was down on the totem pole. And after a couple months of that, I started feeling insecure. Because before I had the language to deal with it, I'd start picking at him, throwing little barbs over my shoulder to him, or criticizing him. Now, besides the fact that he's a words of affirmation person, criticism was the worst thing. But also, it started undermining his sense that he was a pretty adequate husband and father, And because I was communicating to him that he wasn't cutting it. Now, a man's primary way of responding when he feels inadequate is to withdraw emotionally. He kind of goes inside, and because he's trying to figure out, well, I thought I was doing a pretty good job, and for him, I thought I was keeping all these plates up in the air, and she thinks I'm not, and I don't know what to do about it, and so he kind of goes in. As soon as he goes in emotionally and withdraws, what happens to my need for security? then it's really starting to spiral out of control because now he's even withdrawn from me. Before, at least, he was just busy. Now he's emotionally withdrawn, and now I'm really spiraling out. So what started out as he didn't take out the garbage is now World War III, you know, I mean, because I'm feeling insecure, not first, not chosen, and he's feeling inadequate. The reason this was such an important insight for us was because it gave us a language. When I started feeling that, instead of picking at him, and criticizing him, I began to be able to say, time out. Listen, I know it's busy season, and I know I have to make it till April 15th, but you know what? I'm really feeling like your attention's been so diverted that I just need some time. I need to feel like I'm first again. That's so much more productive than, well, you must like that secretary because you're always at work, or, you know, stupid things that you say when you're
Always
aggravated.
wins big.
Yeah. You know, when you're annoyed. So, and recently we heard, and we're going to put this in the manual when we do the rewrite, but marriage counselors have said that the criticisms they most often hear from spouses are this. The wife says, he doesn't choose me, which is her need for security. She's got to feel chosen. She's got to feel like she's first. And the husband says, she doesn't respect me. That's she's communicating something that he's inadequate, so she doesn't respect him. And that's what marriage counselors would say, which is the same way of saying this. That was a very helpful insight. And even when we go to high schools and talk to we've talked at Judgmental High School and we're all boys' high schools, and we talk about it to seniors, and they know that dynamic, especially the football players. Yeah, because my girlfriend, every time football season starts, at practice all the time, she gets all aggravated, we get in all kind of fights. I said, why is that? Well, because she said all I think about is football. I said, yeah, well, basically what she's trying to say is, I know, am I first? Well, no, she's not first because I'm playing football. You know? I mean, 17-year-old boys are just great, you know. But I'm just saying, they know already, they're seeing it in their lives that the dynamic's being played out. They just don't, understand the impact of it, but it's been very helpful. The information on pages 69 and 70 are, again, great background information, and I'd like to just go right through to number 71 because page 71, I want to talk about that for a minute. In order to do that, let me turn to page 74 in the handout section. 74 handout. It's called Ground Rules for Resolving Marital Conflict. If you could just look at that page. 74 handout. Okay. This is a list of ground rules that we're going to give. We give to every engaged couple, to two copies of this as we're sitting there with them.
And it tells you in the manual exactly at what point to give this to them. So this is sort of like a discussion piece you hand to them in the middle of the presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
And do you want to see? And it's on page 70 in the manual. It's going to tell you to do that. Anyway, and what we ask them to do for homework as part of the homework on conflict and communication is to read these 15 rules for resolving marital conflicts and discuss them to see if these rules would be helpful in governing their conflicts. Okay? Now, there are two of them that we always have to explain, and those are the ones that are on page 71. So, number 5 is avoid you statements. You always, you won't ever, you don't. Instead of making such, accusatory sounding you statements, it's always better to speak from the I perspective. I feel unappreciated, or I feel disrespected, or I think that this is what's going on in our marriage, what do you think? Instead of you statements, because that puts the person on the defensive. And then number 12 is the drive-through method of communication. And basically what that employs is the same technology, the same research that companies like McDonald's or Taco Bell use in order to get their customers back. They want to make sure they're communicating well with their customers. So I always use the example. I'm going to use Wally and Jenny here as my example. So Jenny drives through the McDonald's, and the voice says, "Hi, welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?" And Jenny says, "I want a Big Mac, big fries, and a large Coke." And so they say, you want a Big Mac, biggie fries, and a large Coke, is there anything else? And she says, yeah, I want some McDonald's and cookies. And so they say, is that all? Yes. That'll be $10, drive around. She pays her $10, she gets that bag, it's got a Big Mac, biggie fries, a large Coke, and the cookies in it. She drives off, she's a happy camper. She's coming back next week because she had such a good experience. Why? Because she spoke, they listened, they repeated what she said so that showed her that they understood what she was saying. And they validated what she asked for by giving her exactly what she asked for. Next week, Jane comes back, same McDonald's, new employee. And so she says, hi, welcome to McDonald's. And Jenny says, yeah, I want a Big Mac, biggie fries, and a large Coke. And there's a hesitation, and the voice says, you know, I can see you over our TV monitor, and you look like you could stand to lose a few pounds. So I'm just going to send you back a glass of water and a salad with no dressing. What's she going to do? Drive off, call Wally crying on the phone. She's going to be all upset. Why? Because why? In effect, it's the same thing we do to each other when we say, you shouldn't feel that way. That's ridiculous. That's stupid. I don't even know why you feel like that. When we start trying to tell the other person how they should think or feel or perceive, and we don't respect their opinion, they're trying to share themselves with us. It's the same thing as that employee trying to tell you what they think you should have instead of giving you what you're asking for. Now, how does that play out in a conflict? Sometimes there are conflicts that we have in marriage that are repeated, that we just can't seem to get to the bottom of. There might be an issue that we just cannot see eye to eye on. He doesn't ever remember to enter the ATM withdrawals. Well, not him. Yeah, that wouldn't be him, but I've had that before. We had a couple that the bride, brides come with a whole paradigm of what their wedding is going to look like, okay? She, ever since she was a little girl, wanted a New Orleans wedding. They were from out of town. A New Orleans wedding at the cathedral at night, very formal. Bridesmaids in long dresses, grooms in tuxedos. She picks out a groom, however, who doesn't go along with her dream because he refuses to wear a tuxedo. Now you think that's a simple problem to solve, but it wasn't. It became like World War III. We worked with them for several weeks trying. But we taught them to do this where they each take a turn being the employee and each with the customer. And when you're the employee, you have to listen to the person who's the customer. And all you can do is repeat what you heard them say. I think I heard you say, and so what I'm hearing you say, and you can't defend yourself or give your opinion. You just keep repeating what you heard them say until they feel like they've said everything on their side and you've really heard them. And then you switch roles, and then you have to be the one listening, and they get to express their opinions. Once they did that, they were able to come to a resolution. But it takes time, so you don't just use drive-through communication to decide where you're going to go to dinner at night or something, But on serious things that you can't see eye to eye, to do that discipline of one being the employee and one being the customer really works. Why? Because you're forced to listen. Dr. Chapman tells us that in a conflict, a couple usually only listens for 17 seconds before they start framing their defense. And once they start framing their next argument, they're not listening to what the other person's saying. And so in order to repeat what you heard your spouse say, you've got to be listening. And we also like to make at the bottom of page 71, this is really important, and it's the difference between empathetic listening and judgmental listening. Now, judgmental listening is something we do all day. You're listening and you decide, I agree with that, I don't agree with that. I believe that's true, I don't believe that's true. I like that, I don't like that. You're judging the way the information's coming at you. But empathetic listening is to listen to another person with the intent of understanding deeply what they're trying to say to you. You're listening for what's underneath their words. You're listening to try to understand their real feelings or their heart in it. And it's a totally different kind of listening than judgmental listening. Lloyd and I are both trained spiritual directors for the Archdiocese of New Orleans. We do a lot of listening. And it's the listening of trying to understand what they're trying to reveal to you about what's going on in their interior. And that's how we need to listen to each other as spouses, especially, or your children, you know, that you're not just laying the law down and not, you're trying to understand what they're saying to you. And then that opens up a whole new world of understanding.
So we skipped over a little bit of the content in terms of the conflict resolution, and all you make is some general comments because the bulk of the work is really being done in the homework. So if you look at the homework section on page 74G, resolving conflicts. It's the last one in the section. And he says, resolving conflicts, opening the doorway to emotional intimacy. This is a homework that you will always give, and what it really does, between that little ground rules page that you've given them and asked them to talk about the ground rules for conflict, and this one asks them, in 74G, asks them to unpack a recent conflict. And this is really very fruitful for them. So they, at a time when they're not having conflicts, they unpack the last argument they had, and they talk about how it unfolded, what did you do, what did I do, how did I behave, how did you behave, what behaviors do you give off during a conflict, what behaviors do I give off in a conflict, what would I like to change about the way we resolve conflict. And then one of the questions that is really helpful is that second to last one. If you could persuade your partner to change or moderate only one of the behaviors he or she exhibits in a conflict, which one would it be? And boy, if you could just get that one taken away, you'd be in a much better place. So that's really the way that a lot of the conflict resolution content gets communicated. Is some general comments about what happens in a conflict, and we have all that here in the manual. And then we jump right to reviewing those ground rules, and then we give them that homework. So if you look over on page, I think it's 72A, you look at homework assignment, because we're doing something a little different here. Yeah, 72A. So 72A is saying give them a copy of the handout, ground rules, which you've already given them. Ask them to review it together, decide on which ground rules govern their conflict in the future. Assign 2 or 3 other homeworks, like we said, we usually do 4, based on the particular needs. But again, one of those will always be that resolving conflict, which is stipulated over here. You always give them one of those, and then you ask them to listen to a portion of the CD. Now you have a CD in your jacket there. It's from Christopher West. It's on the issue of sexuality. And the way that CD works is there are 3 roughly 20-minute segments in the CD. It's about an hour-long CD. There are 3 20-minute segments. We ask them to just listen to the first 20-minute segment and not to listen to the rest. They'll listen to the rest later on as we go through. But it's the first 20-minute segments, I think it's tracks 1 to 9. It's about 20 minutes in length. Encourage them to listen to that in addition to the homeworks that you're going to give them. So this is trying to introduce and maybe tee you up for the sexuality talk as the next go round. And we'll talk more about the CD once we start dealing with the area of sexuality. So just to point out that the homework is a little different. So you're giving them some homeworks on communication, and then you're giving them the CD to listen to. So some of the exercises, we'll just touch briefly, some of the ones that we find are particularly good. 74B, Let's Talk, is just like a little checklist of a bunch of different areas asking how difficult or easy this is for you to talk about. Very simple exercise, but often can surface some real issues. One of the other that we often use, 74E, Letting You In, 74F, If You Really Want to Know Me. Both of those are really very good, very helpful, and ask questions at a little deeper level, So on 74E, Letting You In is that one in the middle of the page that asks those 2 questions I mentioned earlier. I think I probably spend too much time doing, and my future spouse spends too much time doing. So we often use 74E and 74F, and we always use 74G.
Okay, we'd like to take a 5-minute break and come back for sexuality. So go run to the restroom and then come back, we'll do sexuality.
Sex in 5 minutes?
There's coffee.